There is a fifth dimension.
About the unknown.
Beyond that which is known to man.
The Garden of Thought.
The Babylon Project was our last best hope for peace.
Unexplained.
Mythologies.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call...
The Garden of Thought with Jeff Lippman.
Eventually, our sun will grow cold and go out.
Whether a thought is spoken or not, it is a real thing, and it has power.
It won't just take us. It'll take Marilyn Monroe, and Lao Tzu, and Einstein, and Morobuto, and...
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience.
All of us was for nothing. Unless we go to the stars.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name.
The Garden of Thought.
Welcome to the Garden of Thought.
Very special Garden of Thought. I know I say that they're all special, and you know what they pretty much are. But this one is especially special to me because it is something, good news for the audience, that I know almost nothing about. And that is not exactly uncharted territory here in the Garden, but as we're going into our 6th year, it's getting more and more so where I know almost nothing about it, or I know almost nothing about it. And this is the paranormal and or the occult, or whatever the right term is, in Shakespeare. I skipped Shakespeare. I tried to read it, couldn't understand Old English, didn't try, gave up. I wasn't a bad student in high school. I was a pretty good student in high school, only pretty good. I was constantly told I didn't work up to my potential. Correct, accurate. I read the Cliff Notes. I watched the movies, did anything except read it. I couldn't even get through Romeo and Juliet. That is to say, I'm not sure that I know the difference between Hamlet and Macbeth. I know that Hamlet is in Denmark, and I know Macbeth is in Scotland because of the Mac. That, if it wasn't for that, I'd have no idea. So, we're going to hear other people's thoughts on this today who know something. And I have found 2 people with Shakespearean acting training and experience, and I'm so thrilled to put these 2 people together and that they both said yes. Now, one is it's probably his magical number of 7th appearance, if not more, and that is the Reverend Dr. David Parry, our dear friend from England, moved to Butte. He's a doctor, he's a reverend, he's a thespian, he's a playwright, he's a poet, he's in royal societies. He of course is a church leader, of which church I'm not exactly sure. Originally it had 4 names and I could barely pronounce any of them. I got the word old correct. That one I could read or pronounce. And he's also a conference and convention organizer from time to time. So if you recognize him from any place other than this show and my references, it's the Northfield Anthropology Conference that he at some point changed to another word I have trouble pronouncing, anthroposophy. I just did it again. But David, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for such a build-up. I'm hoping I don't start choking all the way through this discussion. Jeff, you've become a real personal friend of mine and not just a colleague over the last couple of years, and I'm grateful to know you. I do have a confession before we go any further.
Uh-oh.
For me, the Nephilim Anthropology Conference was art. I don't know what other people thought it was, but for me, do I really think there are 30-foot people hulking around the earth? No, I don't. So that's probably destroyed my reputation in certain circles, but they're the circles I don't care. So yeah, I mean, you're a great guy. Don't know what to say. I mean, I'm pleased you've got some sort of connection, no matter how loose, with Shakespeare. An underrated author, ironically, nowadays. And it's a great show, and anything I do to support you with this show, I'm more than willing to do. I'm sick of being invited on to shows as the minister that's willing to talk about anomalous phenomena without wanting to burn everybody at the stake. You know, I'm really... So I'm sort of sick of those shows, to be honest. You know, does weird stuff happen? Yes. Does that mean everybody's evil? No, it doesn't. You know, so this is a great show. We're talking about theatre. I'm meeting new friends already, unexpected new friends from unexpected fields of activity. So yeah, it's great, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we're going to talk about that other guest. This is first of all, if anyone, I'm blushing right now because when the Reverend Doctor calls me a colleague, it's like I'm so incapable of being considered a colleague. I mean, there are things that I'm a colleague. Anyway, so our other guest, he too is a thespian. He too is a whole lot of things. He has thoughts. We're going to get Aron's thoughts on this. This is Aron Haddad, Aron Stephens, Aaron Rex, Damian Sandow, the current #1 contender to the NWA heavyweight title right now, and I'm sure he's going to win it. I mean, there's very little doubt in my mind. By the way, for people who don't listen to my other shows, my co-host, Mr. Thomas on Gospel of Thomas, is, of course, the current #1 contender to the MLW Heavyweight Championship. So I'm just surrounded by #1 contenders, and we've had, of course, 2 prior NWA champions on that show, also when it was Book of Black. Actually, Aaron was our first guest on the Book of Black, so we've had Tyrus and EC3, both former NWA Heavyweight champions. But I'm talking a lot when I have frickin' Aron Stephens here. Aaron, how are you?
I am wonderful. How are you?
I'm great. I am just so happy that you said yes and David said yes and we could get the date together.
No, it's an absolute honor. And again, to be on the show again and to meet, of course, the Reverend and just hearing a little bit about him. The world needs more people like you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Especially today. So it's wonderful.
Yeah,
I'm honored to be on.
And well, thank you for that. And be careful because you'll be invited on again, I assure you. Last thing I'll say about David is that David is absolutely a top of the line, across the board, consistent pacifist. No matter what, he doesn't pick sides. He's constantly a pacifist, and you cannot fail to respect someone who is entirely consistent. All right, enough about this rambling. Shakespeare. Educate me, and let's start with obviously the occult and paranormal and where it fits in. All I know is that there was a ghost that gave him a knife at some point. Well, not Shakespeare, but one of the characters. So I don't know who wants. We're going to go in alphabetical order. Let's start with A and Aaron's. I keep saying Aaron's thoughts because that's his Twitter. It's at Aaron's thoughts.
I think to state the obvious first, right? Shakespeare was a product of his time, so I think. Let's kind of set the table, right, for, how he's writing. In the Elizabethan era, in particularly, it was very influenced by a Neoplatonic philosophy, which was, to kind of surmise it, it's a little more mystical than Plato's philosophy. You believed elemental theory, if you will, and essentially like one great reality from which all things stem from. So there was that kind of foundation. And, of course, you have a very Rosicrucian influence, I think, which was going across more societal at the time, too, because the early 17th century, that's when really Rosicrucianism started to gain notoriety. And, if you just look at his works, there's sprites. I believe that's what Puck was. Reverend, correct me on that if I'm wrong. Creature. And we were talking about the Tempest, where Prospero's conjuring the storm. So, again, the core belief that there was that which you cannot see. There was this one reality for which all other reality emanates, and that's kind of I think that'll be my opening statement.
David, what do you say?
Oh, not a bad opening statement. I want to step back and talk about pacifism before I give my 5 benefit. Thank you for that, Jeff. I know you too were a little uncertain as to where I stood in all of that at the beginning. I'm a lifelong pacifist. When I was very, very young and he was very, very old, I used to go on marches with Bertrand Russell. And I asked him to his face what he thought about religion. So he liked Quakers, by the way. And he said to me he could understand exactly what Quakers are doing. Couldn't understand the rest, but he could understand that. And he said, well, no, to to his point of view, to his mind, which is something I've held to ever since, any extra killing, I mean, what would it solve in any problem? You know, I want Israelis to be happy. I want Palestinians to be happy. I want Ukrainians to be happy. I want Russians to be happy. I want Americans to be happy. I want British people to be happy. That's the biggest draw nowadays. I don't know if that's going to happen. You know, I just want everybody to have the chance of a life and the chance to flourish and the chance to live with their families and their loved ones in a peaceful and reasonably secure environment. And I don't really see why that's such a monstrous thing to hope. And for me personally, I've held on to that for years. How can further murders, when a human being kills another human being consciously and deliberately, it's a murder, it's not just a killing. So how can that help anybody? That's my position. You can all shout at me, but that is my position. I'm more than willing to go to the stake for it, because what else can you do? You know, like Mr. Spock, you have to sometimes just stand your ground. And I can understand why people get upset. Of course I can. I can understand why they get angry. I can understand how people get swept along with the zeitgeist of times and the collective mind of cultures. I can understand all of it. But isn't it time we just all try to grow up a bit and understand each other and ourselves a little bit more? So that's my comment on pacifism. I don't believe there's another way forward. Which curiously might also be Shakespeare's view. Certainly when I was, young Aron, much younger than me.
Oh, thank you. We're becoming better friends by the line of sentence, I tell you.
Well, I mean, I'm not as old as I look, I hope. But certainly I'm aware of the generational difference. I mean, when I went to school, I went to a country school in this part of the world. There were no other schools in the area. And the teachers were of a very high caliber, which doesn't happen nowadays in either of our countries, I think. And was told by this old stately spinster, a word you're not meant to use nowadays. Shakespeare. You know, absolute pacifist, believed in everything, believed in nothing. And I, oh my God, what an intro. So I got fascinated with the character of the bard from that time. I 100% agree with Aron. For quite a century or two, they thought Shakespeare was a humanist. But of course, what Renaissance humanism means isn't quite what we mean nowadays. And I've no beef with any type of humanism. You know, if people want to be nice to people and proud of people, they get a big hug from me, nothing else. Great. Was he, I think the thing we're skirting around already, which needs addressing, is was he a practicing occultist, whatever that means? Because it might have meant something back then quite dissimilar to what we mean now. And if not, was he only an adherent to those types of Hermetic philosophy which were so prevalent at the time? As I say, I agree 100% with Aron. I personally do believe he was a practitioner. And there are very real reasons why I believe that. But my view is, Aron's entirely correct. It's the thought scheme of the time, the thought world of the time. Shakespeare threw himself massively into these sort of Platonic and post-Platonic views of the oneness of reality behind all things, and the mystical energies it occasionally produces. But, he would have thought that ultimately these things are mysteries, these anomalies arise, these highly eldritch energies are formed, they pass through our world, we either understand them or we don't, they do whatever they do and they go on. They go somewhere else. And, it just strikes me as a rather common sense view. Particularly if we look at the paranormal. I think we need to have some ground rules about vocabulary, if that's all right, gentlemen. The paranormal is actually something that fascinates me. It's something I'm sick of talking about, but it's something that fascinates me. By definition, it must mean a part of the material order, like Lyle Watson's book Supernature years ago. So it is not about the supernatural, which by definition must be above nature. It is something which is added on. It's an extra facility of nature. Supernature, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know the book, is a really good read. You'll pick it up and have a go. So the paranormal are sort of things, bioenergetics, things that we all know about, but there's an extra extension to them. Whereas things like occultism and the supernatural are by definition claiming that there are other orders of being which we can interact with. So they're quite different claims. I suspect there's a bit of truth to all of it, but that's me so far. Any thoughts, anyone? Shut up, David.
Oh no, please, Reverend. No, I get fascinated. This is a wonderful conversation already. By the way, thank you. So yeah, I think to add to that, right, to where if we look at us as humans, and I think kind of in our nature we are or can be a little bit arrogant, like the universe revolving around us. And as you said, that which is paranormal is part of the natural order of things, or paranormal or supernatural, but it's only what we can understand we consider natural, and that's kind of operating under the presumption that we understand nature. When no, we understand, I think, part of nature, but there's other elements to nature, via them interdimensional or however you'd like to call them. But other planes of existence. It's all pointing to some kind of transcendent reality. And, where we fit in on this, I mean, that's part of the human condition, right? Like trying to find our place in the world. What does it all mean, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these are very, very deep questions that we can't solve in one podcast or even a century. And even you can make the argument there's amazing forms of spiritual systems out there. But again, if one of them had all the answers, we would be living in a much more peaceful world, right? So I think, again, the human condition, and that's something that even in my main profession, I guess, as you say, but the one I'm just kind of devoting most of my time to right now that's pro wrestling. When people ask me what allows you to do what you do and kind of, get the crowd going, it all goes back to the human condition, right? Like our fears, our desires, and these are all things that Shakespeare has dealt with, and has dealt with again in a way that, as we were saying before we went on the air, how a lot of people in a lot of places today, they're not as familiar with Shakespeare, but I do believe that they're influenced by him, because Shakespeare has influenced, certainly show business in ways that are again being felt and implemented and just very much part of the fabric of to this day.
I think as the sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Jeff. Should I shut up?
Just let me do this little thing, and then you say what you want to say, because I am the straw man for the audience, and actually the audience of this show, in a lot of regards, is probably very well equipped for the conversation that you just had, probably more so than a lot of podcasts. Not to pat ourselves on the back. Even I was able to follow that part just because of the podcast, but I do want to. But at some point, I'm going to get lost on the Shakespeare stuff. So I'm a linear thinker. Yes, I can go in different directions, like, picture in your head like the Loki season 2 where they've got the timeline and things splintering off. My brain can work that way. By the way, I hate it in the MCU. Different story, different podcast, different thing. But for ease, and I don't know if this makes it easier for the two of you, and I don't even know if it's accurate, but I think maybe if we go linearly from Shakespeare's first work to his last work and sort of in between, it doesn't have to be exact order, but if we've got that as the starting point, as his first work and his last work, and sort of explore the different concepts he explored. I mean, we don't need to go through every single one of his plays. I wouldn't ask that of anyone, at least not on one podcast. I'm sure there are podcasts that cover Shakespeare, but I just think that might give it a little bit of order for those people who are, just trying to struggle with, they're hearing the philosophical discussion, which is brilliant, but they also want to hear about the Shakespeare, so that we can have a structure to put them together. And with that, David, whatever you were going to say, please.
You've going to say about 1,000%. Where do I go with it? Right, let's get back to something Aron said. Certainly, if we're looking at the Tempest and we're looking at the figure of Puck, who turns up in a number of places, sometimes heavily disguised. I mean, he's also Ariel sometimes. Ariel would have simply been an air spirit. Thou who are made of air, dost thou have feelings like a man? But Puck is actually the more intriguing character. I mean, in Britain, there are much older names for him, like Robin Goodfellow. And eventually, if you trace it back, you end up with the devil. Shakespeare plays around with mythology, with superstition. He was very aware of the difference between the two because he mocks superstition in a couple of places. He never mocks mysticism and magic. He thinks that's, he believes, rather like myself, that the peasantry in which I include myself is treated rather poorly by the powers that be. I think we can all relate to that nowadays. With the new super elite class, we can all sort of relate to that. And basically, for lack of a real education and the lack of resources, the peasantry are forced into trying to make the best understanding of the world that they can with as few resources as they've got. So he doesn't really blame them even for that. He blames the system, which is way ahead of its time. But, playing around with demons, that happens all the way through. Hell is empty and all the demons are here, which is, when I read that, I thought, oh my God, how terrible. If you look at A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is, I suppose, my second favourite play, you've got to be careful about what it is you think that he's doing. You have the diademed Titania, the queen of the fairies. So in those days, these were ribald times. Our ancestors weren't all sat in church morning, noon and night, praising the Saviour. And why not, you lazy bastards? Get in there and say some more prayers. But, they were very like us. Therefore, some of the spin-off names, it's all documented. She would have been Queen Tit, and would have been addressed like that by the audience. But who is she? Who is she? That's a recognisable figure. Oh my God, it's Isis from Egyptian mythology. How do you work that out? Because of the subliminary titles, the supplementary titles, plus the fact she's seduced by a donkey. So hang on, we're looking at pure Egyptian mythology. That is the enemy of Horus, that sect. All of this deep material is going on underneath. And Shakespeare's almost playing with the audience. How much do you get? How much can you see here? And on the surface, it's the diademed queen of the fairies who's been, fallen out with her hubby, Oberon. There's a row in the human court between Theseus and Hippolyta, which is mirrored in fairyland between a row going on between Titania and Oberon. And everything's a rapprochement in the end. Do you know, film is nothing compared to theatre. I'm sorry. You can burn me at the stake for that, you two as well. Because
his profession, his profession is combat theatre.
I just assume that Americans prefer, that's me being prejudiced, Americans prefer film.
I do.
I love, I embrace me being prejudiced. I love the fact in living theatre, you will get the woman with the head 5 times too big sat directly in front of you. You will get somebody's annoying uncle talking all the way through. It's part of the experience. It's part of the magic of live performance. I think Aron knows exactly what I mean by that, because that's one of the few parts of showbiz, forgive me for addressing it that way, but it draws on the magic of real crowds. So it would be hard to ignore that. It would be hard to ignore that. But for once, it was actually the American version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is the best thing I've ever seen. With that play, you get Mickey Rooney, how about that for aging me, as the wicked Puck, who delivers all of the speeches perfectly. Some of them are inhuman. You've got to listen carefully. Where the bee sucks, there suck I. So in other words, nothing human. Nothing human. No sympathy, no empathy, nothing human. It does what it does because that's what it's got to do. And, some of the notoriously bad performances where they try and make everything into a gag, why not? But it doesn't work. And as I say with Shakespeare, let's begin at the beginning. We need a week to go through all the plays that way, but let's be aware before we go any further that, there are all these hidden depths, deliberately so, in all of the plays. It's almost like Shakespeare's giving us all a test. Can you pass the test or not? Can you see what I'm doing or not? And if not, fine. But you haven't passed the test.
Aaron?
Wow, yeah, like this. Wow, that was deep. Yeah, like again, like the story of Shakespeare, right? Which, it's so funny that you brought up Hermeticism, which I am well, we could do another podcast about that. But that's but yeah.
Careful, you're booking yourself. Careful, you're booking yourself.
No, Hermeticism. I will chat about that all day.
Sold.
But, no, I think when and I have a couple questions to the Reverend, like where we have a very kind of again occult laden style of Shakespeare, which I maybe we could call it that because like in really all of his works, there's the element of the supernatural and the presupposition of a transcendent reality, etc., etc. How much in conflict, right? Because Shakespeare was so popular with the church at the time, and I know that it would have been the Anglican Church, right, as opposed to the Catholics, if I'm not mistaken. But like, how, I guess, in conflict was he at the time, or was this all done under the guise of, oh, it's a play, it's fiction, and we'll all kind of look the other way?
Do I answer that directly, or do you want to comment, Jack? Or?
Oh, you're the spokesperson for the entirety of British history.
Oh God, I'd make a very poor. Since I want the royals to step off the throne here and now, I'm a very poor spokesperson. I don't know what I think of American Christianity at all. With deep love and respect to everybody. That is what Puritans do. That isn't what Europeans do with that religious ideology. I mean, again, without wishing to upset too many people, the king said to the Pilgrim Fathers, "Go or I'll have you all arrested." So they went. It wasn't really a discussion. Please, this doesn't fit our society. You've got to join in, or piss off. So they decided to go. Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Henry VIII, of course, died a Roman Catholic, despite the fact he had a series of big beefs with the Roman Catholic Church. And, we're too sort of harsh on him nowadays. Was he a bastard? Yes. One of the things I take almost as read is that all of our ancestors were bastards. And they could have done better, but they didn't really bother trying for a number of reasons. I don't let our generation off the hook because we know a bit better, so there's no excuse. We ought to try and do better. Henry VIII needed a legitimate heir, or European powers other than his own have the right to declare war on Britain, as it was then. There's no legitimate heir. No, you can't have a girl. Therefore, I am now, as the Spanish, as the French, I am now taking over the lead because you need real royalty in your country to lead the nation. So he was very aware of that. He didn't want that to happen. As I say, the big wars of religion were slowly coming in this direction at the time, in the direction of Britain. He didn't want that to happen. He didn't really understand the arguments. The arguments between the Protestants of that period and the Catholics are absolutely intriguing because it's all to do with how we value individuality or not. Therefore, there are very serious arguments taking place. And really, it's the formation of our modern world that they're arguing about. What are the bases that are going to be the new world order, as we put it nowadays? Is it just aristocracy that has the right to lead? or do these horrible people called burghers and businessmen, do they have a say in all of this? So that's embedded in all of those arguments. As I say, highly probably 90% certainly, Henry VIII died a good Roman Catholic and was hoping for the best. Elizabeth I inherits the throne at the time when the Anglican Church, as a breakaway mechanism, as a breakaway synod, as a breakaway congregation was forming. It depends what you mean. I mean, I think we work with the religious imagination very, very differently in Europe. And that's reflected in our religiosities, some of which are good, some of which are appalling. Therefore, in Anglicanism, you have what's called high church and low church, because it's meant to feed everybody's prejudice. So high church is practically Catholicism, low church is practically positivism, Protestantism, forgive me. Yeah, and there was a Freudian slip, I'm getting to positivism in a minute. There was, because, the new science was coming in, yada, 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 yada. So that's meant to be the sort of jacket that fits all, one size fits all, everybody has a voice, there's no need for contention. It did manage to stop the worst abuses of the wars of religion getting to Britain. So it was successful. Was Shakespeare a part of that milieu? Of course he was. Anglicans aren't really against esotericism, even to this day. I mean, if anything, they encourage it. They would think that the workings of the religious imagination take many forms. Unless you end up with something scriptural, you haven't already passed your final exams. There's a positivist element in all of that. Sit down, do your homework, and you'll end up where we are. Low church would disagree, but it was part of one institution. Therefore, Elizabeth I comes along, and all these forces are still taking shape. By that time, there was an official religious body, which I suppose could be called Anglican. In that sense, they still spoke to the Romans. Therefore, it was really, really complex on the ground. Kids' history books, you've got to start somewhere, but we've got to remember they're kids' history books. They're not for grown-ups. Everything is messy, and everybody's talking about different things. Shakespeare would have been encouraged to continue unless he went too far. Sometimes they thought he did go too far. Macbeth was a step too far. They didn't like that at all. And it was negative about royals, so they didn't like that in the least.
Why? Tell us, elaborate on the why.
The why they didn't like Macbeth?
Mm-hmm.
There are two reasons why they didn't like Macbeth. Firstly, that's an entire alchemical formula in a play. The killing of the king, the killing of a king, and the dissolution of his environment. That's part of an alchemical process which leads to regeneration. Shakespeare was perfectly aware of that. Therefore, they're suspicious.
And the church elders too. They'd recognize that also.
Yeah, don't forget there were security forces back in those days, as there are now, particularly under Elizabethan Britain. Dr. D. This immense mathematician. A lot of mathematics is based on what he said. Was also a practicing magician and the servant of Elizabeth I. The original 007. And his signature was 2 eyes under a 7. It means he's the eyes of the Queen under a mathematical formula. He used to go and spying on Poland, and he would use occult methodologies to do that too. All this psychic spying stuff, it could be argued, starts with Dr. D, who thought, by all means necessary.
Oh my God, I have to take a break here because I have to wipe this out of my head. Because I'm thinking about Dr. D. David Schultz. And because I've got these two worlds blending and they're incongruous. So now that that's out of my head and I've said my stupid joke.
It was Dr. John D. Am I wrong in that?
Dr. John D.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm making sure we're okay. Good.
Well, I'll tell you something weird, Aaron. New Scientist, which is, again, positivism. That's haunting this conversation for me, because the positivists either get this conversation or they don't. And there's no middle ground in that, which is a shame. Sometimes they do. There's a magazine in this country called New Scientist, which represents the skeptical, hardcore science branch, on a popular way, because it's a magazine. Sure. In a populist way in a magazine, that, this is our view, this is what the view of the scientific community would be. And a couple of years ago, there was an amazing article which said basically John Dee was a perfect example of a 20th century mind in a 17th century body. And you think, and there's no way of explaining what he was doing with advanced mathematics any other way. No one else was doing it. Certainly the idea of Prospero, he was one of Shakespeare's mates. The idea of Prospero is probably Dr. Jonathan Dee. One of my favourite, as I say, one of the reasons The Tempest is one of my favourite plays is it's a defence of free thinking. Prospero the dreamer, Prospero the scholar, is basically told to get out of Milan by his avaricious relatives. You don't understand real politics, sod off. And so he does, and he takes his books with him, and therefore, is he a saint? He's certainly a Renaissance magus. He can control the stars with his thoughts if he wants to. So he's the perfect exemplar of what would have been a man of knowledge back in those days for Shakespeare. And he's very, very similar to Dr. Dee in some ways. And he's vindicated in the end. One of my Derek Jarman, do you know him as a filmmaker, the British filmmaker? Either of you?
Not me.
I'll send you both a link later. One of my favourite films of his. I'm betraying my sense of theatre. I'm talking about bloody movies all the time on this show. One of my favourite movies is at the end, where Dr. Dee and Elizabeth I are dancing along Brighton Beach, and she says to him, "Do you remember the time when we started talking about celestial mechanics?" And he says, "Majesty, do you remember the time when we talked about Shakespeare and the enchanted gardens?" How can one not see magic and beauty in all of that? Certainly, so, not completely. Ostensibly, that's a defence of people who want to devote their lives to scholarship, free thinking. The last play probably Shakespeare wrote on his own. Don't forget there were plays he co-wrote, which to me are never entirely successful. He's a busy... Do I go for the whole Francis Bacon thing? No, I don't. That's another British elitist, working people can't do that sort of thing. Well, why not? There's only the uneducated laugh at the self-educated. Why not? So, there were people who helped him with some of his plays. What are you looking at? We're looking at a busy actor, director, producer, who's living the life of theatre. So, he takes it on the chin. He'd get in the ring with Aron if it was necessary to boost up numbers. Because that's what you need to do. That's showbiz. But, I'm drowning this conversation. Say something, Aron. Jeff, say something. I'm just babbling on.
I got nothing smart to add. So
it's fascinating because it's funny, like, where we're, we are dealing with Shakespeare, but I think, like, very much where Shakespeare is, in my opinion, like, the shining example of his time in terms of, like, a snapshot of pop culture, for lack of a better word. And, we cannot talk about the influences and, like I said, like, the, having alchemy in his plays. Because alchemy, that, it's a giant part of Rosicrucianism. Of course, that combined with Hermeticism, and then, you could argue some kind of, like, pagan little nodes here and there. But I really had hoped that the conversation would go like this, because, again, understanding who Shakespeare was, understanding the time he lived in, and really kind of, like, just the cultural currents, it's paramount. And, when we look at someone like, yes, like Puck, okay, like shapeshifter, trickster, etc. So, okay, you then have, that is ultimately the devil. Because to go back to the Hermeticism, where everything kind of, the duality, right? I'm sorry, the mentalism. I'm going to go over the principles of Hermeticism here. It's, mentalism, vibration, correspondence, rhythm, cause and effect, gender, and polarity, right? So polarity, and I completely butchered the order, forgive me, but polarity, it is opposites are both part of the same coin, right? So then we have good, we have evil, and you have kind of the notion of Puck being evil and how evil plays into the world, and how it's not always going to be, the devil announces himself with red horns and a pitchfork, and it's kind of, I think, how we as consumers of Shakespeare, right, as the audience, and as humans, we wrestle with that, how we are subject to temptation, and temptation comes in a number of different forms and can take a number of different shapes. And that's why I always think, the Sprite, which was until recently my favorite soft drink, but was also named for what you would call a fairy, kind of a mythical being. And it's interesting because it's like, it's not this sense of romanticism of, and a lot of people today, when they, at least in America, right, when they become spiritual, they watch the movie The Secret, and law of attraction, and kind of opens up a number of different doors where, if it feels good, it has to be right, and, it's all about following your bliss kind of thing. This deals, especially, with Puck and Midsummer Night's Dream, that this is a much deeper concept. And in my opinion, it presents a much more balanced view of what, like, I don't want to use like mysticism was, but I say Hermeticism. Like, Hermeticism is absolutely woven in to all of this when it comes to the mystical, and especially in the Shakespearean time, where we have, again, the Rosicrucian influence, Neoplatonism, et cetera, it deals with it in a much more balanced way, because, with anything, good or bad, that is for the individual, you know what I mean, and based upon the decisions the individual makes, and whatever kind of moral philosophy they subscribe to. And that can be a very scary concept, and that's why I asked the question about the church, because although the church was much less influenced in kind of the day-to-day operations of the country, they were still a force, and they were still very much a presence in society. And I just think this, it really does kind of propose a much more balanced view that at least a lot of people hold today in, the mystical creatures and beings and all of that kind of thing.
David, I have a question for you, and again, I'm not sure if you can answer it, but I suspect you can. And this is sort of based on the more things change, the more they stay the same. Is it that part of why the church tolerated Shakespeare is that Shakespeare was good for business? That Shakespeare had become a star, and so the people would come to see his plays, just like people come to America to see Broadway, or or whatever are the reasons why people go anywhere. They go to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower and to smoke in public. I don't know, but is that part of it? Was there just a baseline economic reason for it, or was it that? Yeah, we don't really mind as long as you're not, in our face too much. We're trying to modernize a little bit. Or some bucket one, some bucket two, and some bucket I don't understand.
You've got to remember, I'm unusual as churchmen go. A short, fat Platonist. So I'm worried about goodness, beauty, and truth all the time. Most of my colleagues are not worried about goodness, beauty, and truth all the time. A lot of them are businessmen, and whatever floats your boat, fine. I'm a pensioner now, so I don't have to worry about those things as much as I did. Are people different to us back then? Of course they're not. The slight difference being is that we have a state church. Remember that it wasn't as, that was a brilliant question, it was a brilliant statement, forgive me, by Aron. The church in Britain in those days was reforming. I don't mean in the sense of the Reformation, for internal political reasons between the Roman Catholics and what would become Anglicanism. Therefore, it was at war within itself during Shakespeare's time, for most of Shakespeare's time. Therefore, if somebody stood up and said something, somebody else stood up and said the complete opposite. So it didn't have the cutting edge, ruthless power that churches sadly tend to wield. Because it couldn't do. There was too much inner dissension for that to happen. But please remember, we're not blessed with either a constitution, that shows how primitive we all are over here, or indeed the freedom of conscience. We have a state church to this day. The Anglicans have their highest bishops have seats in the House of Lords, which is our second chamber. And they can wield immense power. It may not look like it on the surface, but they do. The Lords Spiritual, as they're called. If ever there was an irony, that must be one of them. Was Shakespeare good for business? Yes. He had big friends in the Church of England, what was becoming the Church of England. And as I say, that type of Catholicism has always really been very sympathetic to white magic theurgy. Really, there are only two forbidden sciences in the church: necromancy and astrology. I said astronomy because it was the same thing back in those days. So the practice of all of that was forbidden bewilderingly. Necromancy, I've never put my finger on. Yet I can't see what that's equivalent to in their minds, but just don't discuss it, or you will be immediately arrested and executed.
You can't. I can sort of see it. There's a certain resurrection that's sort of key to your religion. Necromancy sort of democratizes that, I guess, or or perverts it.
I think that's brilliant. I think it's something to do with medicine. They didn't like some of them. Remember, not all of them. Some of them didn't like the advances. The Royal Academy was just starting under Francis Bacon. If ever there was a universal genius, it's him. He's devout, he's a mystic, and he's a top-notch scientist. Therefore, he says, yes, let's go ahead with all of this. So he likes the advances in medicine, his enemies do not. Therefore, all of a sudden, necromancy, as a nice medieval word, which everyone can argue about, is on the table as don't touch. Church politics are intriguing by what they hide under the vocabulary. There's always deep, dark reasons behind it all, normally to do with money or politics or both. And as I say, the other reason they didn't like Macbeth, coming full circle, is because it questions who should be the monarch. Macbeth is not the clear monarch. The weird sisters, whoever they are, again, you're looking at the triple goddess. Shakespeare playing with paganism. When this is said to both of you, when shall we three meet again? It would have been clear to those audiences, unlike nowadays, who those sisters were. That sort of folk knowledge is slipping away from Britain now, and it's very recent that it started slipping away, but it's going. The three weird sisters would have been instantly recognisable to Shakespeare's audience. That in itself, if the Puritans had been in charge, which at that time they couldn't be, it was too early, would have had him arrested.
Well, recognised as who?
Oh, the triple goddess?
Who's the triple goddess?
Right. In the old pagan way, they tended to see God as woman. They tended to use female metaphors for the divine instead of masculine metaphors.
So, are we talking about the maiden, the mother, and the crone?
Yeah. It's the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Again, it's the discussions behind all of this are intriguing. They feel, and there are some very serious and good people that feel that doesn't really work. You need the imagery surrounding a father to really describe the work of the divine in a world of shadows and shades like ours. You need a father figure. It sounds very simple-minded, but it's not the minute you start going into it. That's not how our ancients thought of things. They either like the idea of lots of different powers constructing a world with a single point of origin, or they liked the single point of origin having more than one manifestation. Therefore, the goddess is really the figuration, the configuration of divinity if you go back far enough, even in Britain. Therefore, Shakespeare's audiences would have instantaneously recognised who that was and what she was saying and why she was saying it. But that wasn't what caused the problem with this play. Macbeth may have been given the prophecy, but there is no clear reason why he should be king. And you've got a woman coming to the throne, who came to the throne. Right, sort of women can't really take the place of kings. They're only women, so all that's going on.
In the Elizabethan era, ironically enough, which is, I always think that's funny.
Well, I mean, our history's all irony, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, that irony after irony after irony. And I've said enough, but, sort of those two questions coming together in the same play, recognizable mythological figures that represent a very different religious ideology, plus the fact they're putting into position someone that clearly shouldn't be the king, that shouldn't be the political head,
Got it.
That the powers that be decided was a bit too much and a bit too far, and maybe he shouldn't have said that.
Thank you. Brilliant. I have a question for Aron, and of course you can respond to anything that David says, should he like. You, as I know from our last conversation, our first conversation, was that you are a Freemason. I also know that you're a devout Catholic. Obviously, you've expressed a pretty deep knowledge of Hermeticism and Rosicrucianism.
Oh, I'm a walking paradox.
That's okay. I love walking paradoxes. I think, part of the underpinning thesis of the show is that everybody's a walking paradox. You just have to find out the paradoxical parts of them and get them to talk about those to make a show interesting. Somewhere along the line, and it's not exactly a coincidence that it was upon meeting David and his conference that we sort of skipped over the middle ground and all of a sudden started getting like all-star guests. Anyway, the question before I forget it, because I will, is that, listen, my sources are mostly historical fiction. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, or most of that is more recent and not in this particular area. And that is that Shakespeare is always sort of put with the Templars, the Freemasons, the this, the that. He's sort of like in that line, in the Dan Brown line of, the continuity from Templar to, the line of protecting the line of Christ, the priori of Sion that apparently he made up their significance. In your knowledge, is Shakespeare in that line? Was he in a secret society or secret societies?
Okay, and again, I say this. So Freemasons, we are not a secret society. We're a society with secrets, like the Knights of Columbus, the Elks Lodge, right? I don't know what goes on behind closed doors at the Elks Lodge meetings, but
cheap beer.
What Freemasonry, from a philosophical standpoint, is not unlike Shakespeare. And, the fraternity as we know it today was greatly influenced and kind of shaped around that time, beginning of the 17th century, et cetera, et cetera. And, a lot of the famous Freemasons that we know today, especially in America, we think Founding Fathers and, not to go on with fiction, National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, that whole kind of notion. But I think let's look a little bit deeper when we were talking about, the church having influence, and let's go to Catholicism now. So, Illuminati. I believe maybe this was around that time, maybe later 1770s, I believe. But so you essentially had the Illuminati, and no, they're not like the rappers and stuff like that. You see all these weird videos. No, these were a group of individuals who said to know God and to understand the divine. So they were very much operating, again, there is a transcendent reality. But to understand God and to better understand God, let's look to nature and see what we can find. So one thing leads to another. At the time prior to this, by the way, and the reason I think Illuminati is getting a bad name is, it was Galileo, I believe. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but the Catholic Church hated Galileo. No, it's not like they were worried about Galileo overtaking and finding something out and saying, hey, I disprove all of the theories of Christianity/Catholicism. He was teaching a method that has not been scientifically proven yet at a Catholic university. So that alone, right? And no one really talks about that because they were like, hey, no, you don't have enough evidence to back this up and teach it, and we don't want to support it. So if we go back into that, and I'm so sorry about if I'm getting off subject, we'll bring it back home. But if you look at recorded history, and Reverend, please, if I'm wrong, chime in, there has never been a bigger benefactor and contributor to scientific research than the Catholic Church. They were very much wanting to, even the Big Bang Theory was invented by a Catholic priest, and what does that say? And, we have, I think, like I said, especially in the West too, there's a very one-dimensional theological approach to Christianity. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's because people don't want to dig that deep. But if we go, let's peel back the onion a little more with what the Reverend was saying, right? How you had a lot of people who believed in divine feminine, right? And then you get now, Christianity, and you have your Abrahamic religion saying, no, father works better. No, mother works better. If we really boil it down, if you look at Scripture, the human mind is finite. It cannot fully comprehend the Creator, the grand architect of the universe, for all my Freemasons out there, right? The God, for lack of a better word, right? We can try, right? And we can conceptualize attributes of God: kindness, love, charity, mercy, right? And then we could even kind of assign a gender to it, the way a mother would love, right? The way a father would love. Like this is all part of it, right? In terms of how the divine and how the transcendent fits into the human mind, so we can compartmentalize it. And again, I know I kind of made a joke about the movie The Secret, but there is a line from that movie. I believe it's Jonathan and Beth work. God made us in His image, and we've been trying to repay the favor ever since. And that to me is where, again, a lot of this stuff gets diluted, it gets romanticized, and it gets tainted. And because people want to believe, the legend of the Templars, yes, the Templars were a order commissioned by the Pope to protect pilgrims going to the Holy Land. Yes, the Crusades happened, etc., etc. And yes, the Templars have a lot of cool stuff, but if you look at, what the Reverend was saying in the works of Shakespeare, the issues he was dealing with and the statements he was trying to make and how he was making them, there is definitely not only mysticism, but there's a lot of truth if you can kind of even break this down into like a Masonic view of the world, a Catholic view of the world. Truth is truth, right? We talked about, it is wisdom, strength, and beauty. And I believe, Reverend, you said wisdom, truth, and beauty. But those are essentially, those are the pillars that, as humans, we rest upon, whether we like it or not. There's been a war on objectivity in the last couple of years. I'm not trying to get to whatever, but where when you attack objectivity, right, and I'm talking about objective moral truths as well, you see things can kind of deteriorate because there's no foundation to stand on. And Shakespeare, dealing with, we'll say it is truth, beauty, and wisdom, right? Those are the essential elements that all Shakespeare's play rely on. I hope that wasn't too long-winded, and I hope that wasn't too...
No, it was definitely not too long-winded. Absolutely. And I'm sure the David has, you keep calling him the Reverend, which is of course appropriate, but I know him as David, so, so I'm sure he's got something to say to that they will meet your level of intelligence. I don't.
I don't know if that was intelligence. That was just what I spewed out. So.
I find you both very intelligent men. And it's wonderful speaking to you both. I mean, Aron said so much, it's hard to know where to begin. I mean, I've no comment on Freemasonry whatsoever. I've got some good friends who are Freemasons. On the local level, I mean, in this part of the world, they still do so much good work. It's legendary. I mean, you know, you get... No, I'm on the island of Bute in the Hebrides.
Oh my God! Yeah.
So that was that old magician Jeff Lippman making magic. Now I'm in that. Come and visit us. We're in the Hebrides now. 40 years of living in London, and I couldn't take any more. So we moved to this gorgeous Scottish island. You're both more than welcome to pay us a visit. So, you know, we visited the local lodge because this is a tiny island community. Because of the art. I mean, it's got a reputation across Scotland for sort of folk art.
Well, hold on a second. Is the Scotch like, you know, the cost of Budweiser here? Because if that's the case, then I could save money on the trip.
My dear friend, this is third world Brit. There is nothing cheap here anymore.
Oh.
Under Starmer's bewildering leadership, but that's a different kettle of fish, I suspect. Yeah, so what are the local Freemasons known for around here? Doing loads of charity work to get a big machine for the local hospital that it couldn't afford. That's Freemasonry on the ground in this part of the world. I had some friends at Grand Lodge when I still lived in London. A spectacular Art Deco building that was built by donations from ordinary members. Was I overwhelmed by a dark atmosphere? I've heard some of that on YouTube. No, I wasn't. Sorry. It's probably my insensitivity, but nothing like that happened. They showed me around the museum. They gave me a cup of tea. They asked when I was going to write a book on Freemasonry. I had to confess it wasn't at the top of my list, but it's there somewhere maybe. So my experience is extremely positive. David Icke. I mean, I had a position for a couple of months. I was actually in Arts at the People's Voice on David Icke's global channel. What was it? The People's Voice. I was there for a couple of months. Never got to meet David Icke. Met that awful son of his, Gareth Icke. What a lout. Anyway, Jeff, Aron is a gentleman, rather like you, Jeff, but that guy's a lout.
Except tall and handsome.
You're both tall and handsome. I'm short.
I'm not tall.
And odd, but you know.
I'm average height, and I'm a little bit fat.
Well, yeah, but you're a lawyer. You've got to be careful what you say to lawyers.
It's true. Be careful.
That's a joke. So I know.
Don't kill all the lawyers first. I posted about that on Facebook.
No, we all need lawyers from time to time.
Well, that's a Shakespeare line, right?
Well, yeah, she's the ultimate lawyer. So I've nothing to say about Freemasons. Are there these deep, dark conspiracies? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, they're not working. If they're really plotting to take over the world, why haven't you done it? So I don't really go for all of that nonsense. The Illuminati's, again, I tend to have a very down-to-earth, boring, rational view of it all. I mean, wasn't it a group of scholars that got together
in Bavaria
and said, we're going to allow the light of knowledge to shine through the world? My God, what a group of founders. I mean, what's wrong with that? I noticed there are people making careers across the West now talking about this, that, and the other. Good on you.
See, I thought it was Tony Stark, T'Challa, Reed Richards, Victor Von Doom, and Namor. So, what do I know?
Well, isn't that where you have to put a hand over one of your eyes and make some sort of weird gesture at the camera or something?
Like this?
Nonsense. Yeah, that's it. It's all nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
This may come from an unlikely source. I think the Roman Catholic Church has an exemplary. Has it had problems, and has it done some difficult things, some dark things? Name one human institution that hasn't. Right? Overall, has it got a glittering tradition of scholarship and art? Of course it does. It was wrong about Copernicus. Hey, we can all make mistakes.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, again, you either buy into all this conspiracy bollocks, or you think, are we dealing with human beings in human situations that can get things wrong, sometimes very seriously wrong, but we're all human beings. You know, the good thing about the Roman Church is to me, it always has this self-correcting mechanism. It strives to get back on track. Sometimes it takes a long time, but, you know, most other human institutions don't have anything like that. They don't have any self-correcting mechanism. They don't have the internal discourse to say you're in the wrong. You know, what can we do to sort all this out? So I don't even have a beef with the Romans. You know, and I agree, as I say, from an unlikely source. The moment we abandon some type of standard of reference to do with morals, whatever, no matter how complicated that gets. My master's degree was in morals, moral theology, curiously. So I'm perfectly aware of what a landmine, you know, sort of a field of landmines that is.
Yeah, you're walking through it right now.
Well, I mean, yeah, but, you know, it's worth walking through, it's worth discussing, and they're all, you know, and these things should be debates, not screaming matches. And, you know, without these debates taking place, we're all back wiping our asses on leaves in caves. Is that really what we want? So, you know, no, we all need some sort of standard of good and truth. I personally don't believe we've got to the end of that discussion, but I don't think the Romans do either, not really. Certainly Episcopalians don't. You know, some of the other churches, I mean, what frightens me to death are some of these born-again people in America that are so... Well, yeah, and that's said with respect. I'm sure I don't understand what they're saying, but they're so convinced they know what the truth is.
You know,
is that what Scripture's saying? I'm sure it's not. And, you know, the certainty of that and the overflow, the moral overflow of that, I'm beginning to find a little frightening. Now that human empathy is being demonized in certain circles, you know, that one of the ultimate compassionate responses of man as the animal, I mean, the minute we start demonizing that, where do we all go from here? So, no, I've nothing to say to what Aron said, apart from the fact sometimes things go wrong. Let's look at where things go right again.
Well, Aron wanted to jump in there, so let's let him.
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say about, like, some of the Christian sects in America. To me, that is, you know, and I have been in some very interesting places to where people would consider it scary. Like, I've gone through ceremonies in places where Dan Brown novels start, literally.
Right.
None of that at any point was scary. The scariest thing to me is engaging one of these really, and I don't want to call them extremists, because that is, you know, there are people who are extremists, but when you have this kind of faith, which is, okay, to a degree, I admire a person's commitment to the cause. Truly, to say, this is what I believe, and that's it. And I think that's wonderful, that people can stand up for a cause like that. However, the scary part to me is if you look at the main guy in your philosophy, right? We call him Jesus. And you look at how Jesus acted. Jesus hung out with the tax collectors, the prostitutes, the marginalized. You know, his message was that, you know, acceptance. And I shouldn't say acceptance of sin, but more acceptance of we are all God's creatures, and there is not this number that is written down in a book somewhere that this is how many seats seats there are in heaven, right? And you know, to just openly condemn someone and not even be willing to engage in a conversation to see where someone else is coming from because you view it as, you know, anti whatever particular religion you have, right? And viewpoint you have. That to me is the scariest thing, to where you can have a lot of right concepts, you know, like again, in every major religion is truth, right? But to shut people off and to have a very cold mindset where it's one or the other when you're dealing with something as completely complicated as human beings, right? I mean, we got more issues than Rolling Stone and Vogue put together as a species. You know, I think that's very, very simplistic. And I think a lot of problems can come from that because one of my dear friends is a Jesuit priest, and I am a fan of the Jesuit approach to where, you know, they're not necessarily the guys out there in the collars and the priest cabin. They got their sleeves rolled up. They're in the community. They're getting their hands dirty. And it's meeting people where they are, which is what Christ did. We're supposed to be talking about Shakespeare and the occult. We're now talking about Christian philosophy. I'm sorry, this has been quite a whirlwind conversation, but I'm enjoying the conversation. And but I also think, again, it speaks to even, you know, at a level what Shakespeare was writing about, which is all about the human condition and spirituality, the occult, which all the occult is knowledge that not everyone, or that is not made super public, right? So dealing with these concepts in some kind of a transcendent reality, I will completely shut up now.
Well, I think it goes back to David's initial point or clarification, or when he did definitions. The supernatural and the paranormal are not the same, and the occult is part of the paranormal, but the paranormal exists with the normal, whereas the supernatural is somewhere above or beyond. You know, whether you believe it's above or it's fiction, that's up to you. I don't really care. I'm like the two of you. You believe what you want, just don't try to impose it upon me. But I'm happy to listen. I mean, you know, I do think that most people are there. I just don't think that people in power say that, or that the loudest voices in power are speaking to their audience. That aside, Shakespeare, was he a member of an esoteric secret school, wisdom school, occult society or societies, or not, or do we just not know?
I believe it was rumored he was a Freemason. And, you know, I think you can... He's cited in several Masonic works from time to time. And, you know, I don't know. I can't completely confirm he was one. But I do know that there are some rumors out there that he was associated.
I mean, obviously...
Clarify.
I mean, obviously he was schooled in these concepts. It doesn't mean he was a member. He could have studied them. I mean, and David has gone over beautifully how, you know, and as have you, that Hermeticism, Rosicrucian, alchemy, which I guess is associated with Rosicrucians most recently, but certainly not, you know, they didn't invent it. So, David, I don't know that, do you know the answer or not?
Right, there are, as always, there's more than one answer. Certainly in the field of mainstream scholarship, they would say there isn't evidence to demonstrate that he was a member of any of these schools, which of course were relatively open in Elizabethan times, and you can still check their membership. If you're dealing with internal documents like the Freemasons writing about one of their own, I'm not in a position to comment. I don't know. I mean, certainly Shakespeare knew a number of practicing Rosicrucians, because that was the flavour of the intellectual elite in Britain at that particular time. As I say, Sir Francis Bacon was clearly a Rosicrucian and says so. You know, so he was moving in those circles. The Earl of Southampton, I mean, Shakespeare wouldn't really have got off the ground without that aristocrat's money. He was moving in Rosicrucian circles. That can be demonstrated. But more than that, I think you'd have to look to internal documents, the like of which are not really privy to everybody. You know, I mean, when I used to spend lovely afternoons, as I say, at the Grand Lodge in London, I mean, you know, there were certain things, as an honoured guest, I'd be shown that there were certain things it was very clear they didn't want to discuss. You know, did that mean they were all swines trying to hoodwink me? No, it didn't. It just meant they were internal things for Freemasons, and I was being a bit too pushy and trying to work out as much as I could. You know, it's easy nowadays to see the bad. We're getting very, very bad at seeing the good. That disturbs me a lot. You know, nowadays people, the paranormal community. I've had loads of dealings with the paranormal community. I notice in Britain they've never really taken me as one of their own, which is because I'm not. And that's not said in any triumphalistic sense. That's said in the sense that they don't like a down-to-earth attitude to it all, mostly. You know, I mean, 70% of the time, most of these phenomena, as an example, will be a misunderstanding. You know, somebody stubbed their toe and they got the wrong end of the stick. You know, I mean, there's something going around in psychological circles at the moment called magical thinking, which is really just a half-assed way of trying to debunk it all. That's ridiculous as well. That seems to go back to Freud. I mean, Freud wasn't trying to debunk it all. He was trying to say these things happen, and what are they? But, you know, we're for reasons of careers, for reasons of money, for reasons of notoriety, everybody's accusing everybody of something nowadays. The paranormal community in Britain is one of the worst repositories of that. And therefore they don't really regard me as their own, because I do think some of these things are real. I think they're rare. And, you know, I don't like the fact we have to accuse each other of being in the wrong when we're not. I can't see that. The sign of our time is to find for the prosecution before the defence has even opened their mouth. And I find that a sign for the end of civilization if we're not careful. You know, the West isn't a negotiable element. It's not a negotiable civilization. Everything as we know it in every part of the world has flowered through Western humanism, which of course was deeply religious for most of its history. If the West collapses, that value system collapses with it. Now, what are we left with? I'll give you an example, then again I'll shut up because I'm taking too much time on the show. I spent a lot of time in Central Asia. I mean, I was the first chair of the Eurasian Creative Guild. I've got very, very good friends across Central Asia. These are magical countries. I have been to the mosque where the imams put the genie in the lamp, which Aladdin stole. I've been to that mosque. You know, I mean, these are places of magic and romance and superstition. They're breathtakingly lovely. The people are lovely. And I was privileged. A friend of mine is Sultan Rayev, who's one of the big politicians and dramaturgs of Kyrgyzstan, recently given an award by the royals over here. And we were at dinner one evening with actually, I think he was the most important poet in Russia at that particular time. And Sultan said to me, look, the trouble with the West is that you've left us all, and they meant Russia as well, the trouble is you've left us all in the grip of China. And that really sort of woke me up. You know, what's the big unstoppable power these days? It's actually China. It's not Russia. That's gone. And the Russians at that time, it was a few years back, were deeply unhappy. They felt betrayed, curiously. The Central Asians felt at a loss. And they said, look, why are things like that important? If a Kyrgyz soldier is told to shoot someone in the back of the head, he will follow orders, but he knows it's wrong. If a Chinese soldier is told to shoot someone in the back of the head, they will do it and they won't know there's a moral problem. You know, all cultures, I'm not saying they're inhuman, but they're not all on equal footing in the sense of excellence or moral judgments. We all think differently. We've all got different thought worlds. And do we really want the West, of which Shakespeare, of course, was one of the major architects, Do we really, really seriously want it to collapse? And if we do, are we sure we know what the alternatives are? Because they might be uglier than we think.
Okay.
Amen. Hear, hear.
All right. So not to bring it down to the trivial, but to the trivial I should bring it, or not the trivial, but more towards the topic at hand, because I don't think that we could actually cover it any way. If you were to recommend, let's just say, 3 of Shakespeare's plays or works to sort of run the gamut of sort of his knowledge of the, say, paranormal, whatever, that's the word we'll use, paranormal, and they would sort of get a taste of the understanding and sort of the breadth and scope and depth of it, which 3 plays would you say someone should read and, really read? Like, read, almost like you're studying. I'll give you each. I'll start with Aron.
I'm going to go with Midsummer Night's Dream, The Tempest, and Macbeth. We've discussed them here, and I think those were the 3 that I kind of I instinctively went to because of just the nature of this, and I think with the occult symbolism, it's so prevalent, and those are some great examples in my opinion.
Sounds right to me, David.
I'm going to say some unusual ones. Othello, not only because the themes of magic, occultism, and demonism run all the way through it. Desdemona's father, I can't remember his name offhand, accuses Othello of seducing his daughter. She only marries Othello the more because he's enchanted her. That is never openly said, but those things are running through the entire play. A very deeply misunderstood play nowadays. I mean, you get the black guy, who's the noble, innocent knight of faith, against the evil white Iago, who will stop at nothing to destroy them. That was understood more in the old days than it is now, for sadly ignorant political reasons. So that was done deliberately by Shakespeare. Oh my God, he's a Moor, he's black, and he's the good guy. That was disturbing to people back then. It's disturbing to us for different reasons. Wrong reasons, mostly. But, those themes run all the way through that play. And certainly the open demonism of Iago, screaming on stage at sometimes, to let goodness and humanity drain out of him so he can do what he wants. So, certainly Othello. Titus Andronicus, this masterclass in how inhuman we can all become. It's more the imagery, the pagan imagery in that, than anything overt again. My favourite, if that's the word I'm looking for, scene, of course, the whole problem begins over a misunderstanding. General Andronicus is the greatest general in the Roman Empire. He has gone on a picnic with the emperor. A minor joke is misunderstood by the emperor, who will have his revenge. And he destroys this man on every single level because there's no democratic structure, there's no check or balance to hold him back or stop him. The emperor is ultimate power, and that's what ultimate power can do. My favourite scene is where Titus Andronicus' daughter is kidnapped, taken away by 2 of the emperor's thugs. They cut out her tongue and chop off her hands. They replace the arms with trunks of wood, and they put something in the mouth. I can't remember what it is. And it shows the demonism that is in human nature if we let it go unchecked. And what makes it checked? Humanity, conscience, goodness, truth, beauty. If we throw those things away, we throw them away at our peril. What Shakespeare is saying basically is the angelic in us. We marginalise those things at our peril. It's not negotiable. The idea there is we're in some sort of no man's land morally. And we don't always get it right, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because really it will be unstoppably bad if we do. I'm trying desperately. I hate Romeo and Juliet. Two soporific and nauseating teenagers talking shite and basically dragging everybody else down around them. Grow up, you bastard. So, I mean, that is really puppy love gone wrong.
Right.
Antony and Cleopatra is actually the third choice of mine. That is the play about mature adult love, romance, lust. And again, if you a careful reading shows that the old gods are still here, they've gone nowhere, and they still rule the world. The implication is a Christian. Now, I don't think he means that in a limited sense. That was his vocabulary back in the day for a good guy. A Christian sees beyond that. If you don't see beyond that, you're a prisoner of Olympus. You're a prisoner of the Mount of the Old Gods. So lust, violence, power, because those are what the old gods were. And have they left their thrones? No, they're all very comfortable, thank you. And they're going nowhere. And the choice is ours. The choice is ours. Antony and Cleopatra nearly destroy the world in their own way. But you can understand why, and you can understand why that needs to be resisted at all costs. So those would be my three choices.
Excellent three choices, and actually it turns out to be six choices. So, folks, if you accept that mission, you have your work cut out for you. I'm very thankful that neither of you said Romeo and Juliet, which of course is the only Shakespeare play I could understand, which proves the point that it was just the Elizabethan version of Beverly Hills 90210. So anyway, I always ask the guests if there's an outro song that they associate with what we've been talking about. Now I have two guests here, and let's see if somehow they can come to some sort of accord on it. And it can be any genre. Don't worry about public domain or whatnot. But if there's something classical that comes to mind, that's fine. If there's nothing, I'll probably pick something trite and silly. I'll probably just YouTube Shakespeare songs, and it'll probably be the song from Shakespeare in Love or whatever that movie was 20 years ago.
I am gonna just go with the first tune that popped into my head when you asked the question. That's Monty Python's "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life."
David, you okay with that one?
Well, I'm perfectly okay with that one. I mean, if there's time, there's been a song haunting me all day, which has nothing to do with this at all. Blockbuster by The Sweet, pure glam rock, back in the 60s, 70s, because it was so theatrical. I love Queen. They're so theatrical. And, the whole glam rock thing, where people prancing around the stage in cloaks, great stuff.
All right, well, you two do the collar and elbow and pick one.
Oh, let's choose Aaron's. Let's choose Aron.
I was going to defer to you, so hey, you know what? I guess can we mix them up? Do we have DJ do a remix?
I don't think I can. So that's the thing. I don't think. Nor would I ask my wife to do that because
Just play a Smashing Pumpkin song.
Yeah, Smashing Pumpkin song. All right, I'll pick something. I don't know. We'll figure out. Anyway, Aron, for Hermeticism, I don't know when, but you're booked. I will text you in an appropriate time, and we'll set it up for half a year or so down the line. Of course, at that point, you'll be carrying around Sweet Charlotte, and even though this is audio, I expect to see it on the screen anyway. And David, of course, you and I will always be in touch about all sorts of manners of things. And, folks, I don't know where else you're going to get this. I don't know where, you might get similar conversations, but not from the same voices and not in the same place. I don't know if we exactly covered what the topic was, alone in isolation, but nothing really is alone in isolation. And, maybe you have to listen to it a couple times. But one thing that's certainly not helping anything is me babbling at the end of it. So, David, if you want to be followed and found or supported, how can people find you, and support you?
Sadly, I'm a slave to social media these days, like everybody else. I've got a website, which, yes, is under reconstruction again, www.david williamparry.com. I'm available on Facebook, Twitter, all the rest of it, LinkedIn. It is me that looks at the pages. It isn't some secret secretary because I can't afford one. Remember, I'm a busy minister, so I can't always get back to you straight away, but I will get back to you.
He does, folks. I can assure you of that. And Aron, I know there's plenty of, but I have to say this. Do you ever go to Odinson and say, I'm Haddad, you're just Thor, we're the same?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, I think you should.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at theAronFiles, TheAron Files, or on X at Aron's Thoughts, ARONS Thoughts.
Yes.
And Reverend, please stay in touch with me. I'd love to follow you. This has been just a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much, so it's been an honor to share the space with both of you. And I'll keep you in my prayers.
You've just beat me to it, my friend. Yes, let's keep in touch.
Excellent. This. Look at me uniting worlds. This is great. I'm so proud of me right now. All right, and everyone, watch NWA Power Tuesdays at 6 o'clock on X. If you can't watch it at 6 o'clock, it's still there. You just click on it. It all counts. And they've got some exciting pay-per-views, and NWA is affiliated with a lot of independents now that are now territories, and so check that out if you're interested in wrestling. And of course, like I said, Aron was our very first guest on Book of Black, which is the same show as Gospel of Thomas. I just changed the name depending on who the co-host is. And when it's Lufisto, I haven't figured out how to turn that into a book yet, so or something written. So anyway, folks, go anywhere. Go to Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, WrestlingSoup.com, and you can find Garden of Thought and subscribe, and you will find my 3 shows, the weekend show, sort of like this. You can go anywhere, but I'll just describe it in the most banal way as the History Channel from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. And the midweek show is more like 48 Hours or Dateline or 2020. And then, of course, we have the Gospel of Thomas or Book of Black, which is where we talk to people in wrestling, generally not about wrestling things, like we had Aron today. And I bet you didn't know that Aron could speak about things like this all the time, and was so spiritual and wonderfully. But you would have known this if you listened to Book of Black also. You would have been prepped for this. So can't thank the guests enough. Folks, follow them, support them, do whatever you need to do. And please subscribe, and we'll see you later on in the week.